Hello, everyone. My name's Kyle Benaz. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Netreo. I'm joined by Andy Markowitz, our Technical Product Manager, and today we'll be discussing the topics of monitoring, CMDB, ITSM, and the integration of those systems within your IT landscape. So on the agenda, we'll first go into a small bit of background on the subject area and discuss some of the challenges we've heard about from our customers and others in terms of getting these kinds of systems integrated. Next, we'll walk stepwise through, in our experience, what it takes to really make this kind of integration effective in your organization. And last, we'll talk about some specific product features we've released to help with this process, and then go into a high-level discussion about future plans. Of course, we've also earmarked some time at the end of the presentation for some Q&A. However, we like to keep things interactive, so if you do have any questions, please enter those questions in the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll take them as they come up. So with that, let me turn the presentation over to Andy. Andy, the virtual floor is yours.
Thanks, Kyle. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be signed in from. Thank you for joining us. Ostensibly, the purpose of this webinar is to make our customers and those on the hunt for a network and systems monitoring solution aware of our new ServiceNow application available for installation. And I'll get to that in a little while here. However, when Kyle and I were batting around ideas for the meat of this session, it occurred to me that there's a bigger theme at play here than simply the promotion of a new feature in Netreo, right? And that theme is examining the steps, processes, and other goodies, right, necessary to have a truly integrated information system architecture, right? Maybe there is a good, better, and best approach we can take to reaching that point. I give Kyle full credit for coming up with the title of this session, right? Monitoring plus ITSM plus CMDB together in perfect harmony. And although it likely wasn't his intent, every time I see that title slide, I immediately start humming the tune from the Paul McCartney Stevie Wonder tune, Ebony and Ivory from 1982. So I break into song spontaneously throughout the presentation. You'll know why, but I digress. In the interest of brevity, I'm going to make the assumption that everybody attending today has at least a cursory knowledge of what the Netreo IT management solution is and what it does. Now, for those of you new to Netreo, again, thank you for your time. And secondly, at the conclusion of this session, please let us know if you'd like additional information, and one of our account executives will get in touch with you. All right, so first we'll go into a tiny bit of background here. I mean, what exactly are we talking about, and what's involved in constructing a perfectly harmonious information systems architecture? Now, there's actually a standard that gets into all those details, and it's known as ITIL, or the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. My aim here isn't to discuss ITIL in particular, as that would be out of scope for the session, but rather go into the building blocks that you would use to construct an ITIL compliant environment. Now, in most IT environments, small, medium, large, you're going to find three things, right? First, you're going to have some kind of a CMDB or a configuration management database. Now, a CMDB is a repository that acts as a data warehouse that stores information about your IT environment, and those are the components that actually deliver the IT services to your customers and users. Now, second, you're likely to see some kind of an ITSM system. ITSM is short for Information Technology Service Management. An ITSM system focuses on understanding and meeting end user needs in terms of managing demand, deploying processes, and other activities like that. Now, one of the primary ways that ITSM applications meet the needs of end users is through trouble tickets and incident management. Oftentimes, the term ITSM and incident management are used interchangeably, and while that technically isn't correct, most folks in this space, myself included, still do it, so guilty as charged, and I'm probably going to use the terms interchangeably throughout the presentation here as well. Now, last, but certainly not least, you're going to have various utility systems that live within your environment. Now, these could be applications that handle log analytics, intrusion detection, or any other number of functions, right? Most relevant to Netreo and this session are systems that deal with monitoring and alerting. An NMS, or network management system, is designed for monitoring, maintaining, and optimizing a network, and it typically refers to software used to manage those IT resources. Perhaps a slightly whimsical way of looking at what I've defined here is that you can think of your NMS as the soft and gooey center, right? That should monitor everything in your CMDB and then report on its findings to your ITSM system. Now, you'll notice over here on the right, I populated the logos of many of the companies that live in this particular subset of the information systems universe. Some of them are probably more well-known than others. However, I think the bigger takeaway here is for me to point out that in my definitions, I didn't get into what form those applications take. Sometimes all three of them are discrete tools, right? In the case of something like ServiceNow, you have the option of setting up both CMDB and ITSM in the same system, but it doesn't do monitoring. In other cases, you'll have organizations that literally use a group email box as their trouble ticketing queue, and they've implemented a really elaborate Excel spreadsheet with multiple tabs to represent their CMDB. So the point is, right, it takes all kinds. It isn't one size fits all. There's stuff all over the spectrum. Now, since all these systems are deployed within the same quote unquote information system of an organization, it should make logical sense that you want to get them all integrated and playing nicely together with one another. By foregoing integration, IT teams are putting up roadblocks to their own success that don't have to be present, right? I mean, the first roadblock is going to be that of inefficient IT processes. So for illustrative purposes, let's take a simple example of a server that runs an application for the human resources department. What happens when that server goes off lease and needs to be returned to the vendor? Now, of course, I'm speaking in generalities here, but likely the first thing that needs to be done is the monitoring system needs to be updated so it doesn't send out false alerts after the server gets unplugged. Next, the inventory application needs to be updated so the accounting trolls don't get nervous, right? And then lastly, the ticketing system needs the server removed so cases can't be opened against it. Now, that's three separate processes that must be executed on the same unit of data, for lack of a better word. The IT department would be better off defining a single process. Perhaps you call it, off-lease server decommission, and then have their deployed tools take the requisite action. Now, the next hurdle is actually an outgrowth of inefficient processes, and that's an increased risk of human error. Going back to the decommissioned server example, we outlined 3 courses of action that need to be taken as part of this process. In a smaller organization, perhaps it's one person that would handle all 3 jobs, while at a large company, each task is farmed out, to the monitoring team, the applications team, and maybe the accountants, respectively, right? Now, that's a ton of opportunity for mistakes to be made. No, these aren't likely mistakes that are organization altering in any way, but if you make enough of them and they start to pile up, they can cause real problems. It'd be like, death from 1,000 paper cuts, right? Let's say the monitoring team does do something incorrectly and the NOC sees an outage for a server that's no longer present. How much time gets wasted running down the fact the server in question went off lease and isn't even present in the infrastructure anymore. Now, a third roadblock is extended repair and response times to problems in the IT environment. The reason you're going to have longer repair times should be obvious, right? If processes are less efficient and more mistakes need to be remedied, then it's going to take longer to address potential IT issues, right? That could mean taking time to figure out a server isn't responding because it isn't even a valid device, like that previous example, or something as mundane as NOC personnel routing trouble tickets to the wrong team because everyone's using their own console with their own inventory of devices to determine health and status. The point here is that if you can get everybody singing from the same metaphorical hymnal, right? In other words, a single integrated source of truth, problems are going to get resolved faster. Now, the last challenge I have up here isn't really a problem of not having an integration, but rather a problem of getting integration up and running between all of your systems, right? Even if you're in a scenario where the first 3 hurdles on this list, right, are acknowledged, it's certainly possible that integration can't be done at all or is infeasible to make a reality for one reason or another, right? Take a situation where an environment started extraordinarily small, and at one point a homegrown ticketing system or CMDB got the job done. However, as the years go by, rather than changing to a purpose-built COTS solution, the homegrown tools are simply retrofitted to solve the problem du jour. Integrating with a system like that, it's kind of like trying to build a house on sand, right? It might stand up for a little while, but it's going to be in need of constant care and feeding, right? Now, to be perfectly fair, no integration is a little bit of a straw man that I built up with the intent of demolishing throughout the course of this session. I've rarely seen customer environments where there's no integration and a lack of desire to implement it. The more realistic scenarios that systems are partially integrated through a combination of technology, bubble gum, and duct tape, right? I've often heard the phrase, yeah, we'll get back to that project in a few months, or we just don't have the expertise in-house to write the integration glue that can tie our systems together. If there's one point I want to hammer home for the rest of this presentation, then it's that integration is vitally important. Now, unfortunately, potential benefits derived from projects like this have to be measured indirectly. That might mean correlating lower MTTR to higher website traffic, or maybe fewer open trouble tickets from users correlating with higher productivity, right? It's an indirect measure is kind of the point. Right, okay, so at the onset here, I said maybe there's a prescriptive approach that organizations can take to getting all their systems to play nice together. Something, a good, better, best progression, for lack of a better description. So let's explore a little deeper and talk about a good approach, which is deploying mission-specific tools. Now, for anybody listening in on this session who's a Netreo administrator or at least a power user, they know that our solution has tons of capabilities. If you're unfamiliar with Netreo and the platform, even a cursory glance at our website will show you that I'm not exaggerating here, right? With a little ingenuity and some elbow grease, you pretty much have the ability to bend it to your will. I've seen some pretty crazy stuff over the years working here as an operations engineer and now in product management. I've seen some customers do some pretty amazing things with our tool to get problems solved in their environment, right? And given that kind of flexibility, it begs the question, I already paid good money to deploy Netreo. Can't I use it for my CMDB and my ITSM? I mean, on the CMDB side of the equation, Netreo has a fairly robust auto discovery capability. It can bring in just about any type of IT gear for monitoring. For the things that can't be auto discovered, you can mass import with CSV or with RESTful API calls. For every device, you can also automatically discover device attributes, right? These attributes can be searched on and be used for taking actions. Why should I bother deploying a CMDB, a dedicated CMDB, right? And you can ask a similar question for ITSM. With Netreo, you've got access to a full incident management engine that allows me to correlate alerts with one another. I can set up rules that, if I get a high latency alarm for one device on a site, then it stands to reason any other device from that site will also be highly latent. Why would I want two alarms? I can also take advantage of alerting macros and more device attributes and business workflows. These can be used to govern the priority of alerts that leave Netreo and get sent to technical personnel. This is all stuff that ITSM systems do, right? Deploying an entirely separate ITSM system seems expensive and time consuming. Why bother? Now, the two examples I just gave, everything I mentioned there is 100% accurate. From a product management perspective, we do our best to make each of these features as easy to set up and use as possible. Yes, you could use Netreo as a CMDB. Similarly, you could use Netreo as an ITSM. However, the operative word in that last sentence, the last two sentences, is could. I mean, you could use a flathead screwdriver to tighten a Phillips head machine screw. You could use your teeth to open up a bottle of beer. Just because you can do something doesn't mean it's wise to do so. We do not recommend using Netreo as a CMDB or ITSM for the simple reason that it's designed to be a monitoring tool. It's not designed to be those other two things, right? Yes, there's overlapping data, but a CMDB addresses a specific need within an IT organization, just like ITSM, dedicated ITSM, addresses specific needs. One specific area that comes up with CMDB is that it often gets used as an inventory system, right? In other words, what kind of IT stuff do I have scattered throughout my data center and wiring closets throughout the organization? You could use Netreo for this kind of function, but if you consider the way Netreo is licensed, that's not wise. It's not a good idea, right? Netreo is licensed per device. If you simply need to know that a Catalyst XL switch is attached to a rack in a remote office, but it's powered off, why would you pay for a license to monitor that? Right? Another reason you want to use a CMDB for its intended purpose is something like contract management. To put it somewhat simplistically, an NMS like Netreo is meant to keep track of things that actually have electricity flowing through them, right? It's meant to look at devices and resources that have the ability to answer when queried for status. That's obviously not the case with a service contract tied to a server or a router or a switch. However, from an overall IT organization perspective, right, that contract still needs to be stored somewhere accessible so it can be seen by engineers and NOC personnel, when running down problems, right? And of course, the final reason I have listed up here is tied to the first two. Deployment of a CMDB allows for easier auditing and control of your environment. Since Netreo isn't meant to handle asset or contract management, then while reporting on that stuff through Netreo isn't impossible, it's cumbersome. It's not something you want to do. I mean, what happens in the case of a technical diligence audit for M&A purposes, or law enforcement comes calling for an investigation of your IT architecture, right? Now, the benefits in this page, this is hardly a list of benefits of a dedicated CMDB, but I've chosen these because they're the most obvious in making my point. Okay, why do you want to go after a dedicated ITSM system? Earlier on I made the reference to the idea that oftentimes the terms ITSM and trouble ticketing are used interchangeably. And I also mentioned that as an accurate from a technological point of view to make that association. Full-fledged ITSM systems, right, they do a whole lot more than just trouble ticketing. Just like with a dedicated CMDB, you're going to get the benefit of easier auditing, governance, compliance, and control of your IT environment. In addition to the ticketing component, ITSM is going to help you track and document change control requests, manage application dependencies, and other elements typically found in IT organizations. NMS systems aren't meant to do this sort of thing. Enforcing a square peg into a round hole is just plain ill-advised. The second reason you're going to want to deploy mission-specific ITSM tools is that it's going to lead to improved IT service delivery for users and customers. Now, folks who are new to the world of ITSM might be prompted to ask how, right? I mean, after all, service management, it's a really nebulous term, and it can mean different things to different people. One such example might be quality management, right? Due to the nature in which typical ITSM documents information, tools are available to correlate ticket resolution to reopen rates, for example, right? The higher the reopen rate is, the lower the likely quality of the service for the user community. The same could be said of SLAs, right? I'm probably not going out on a limb here by asserting that SLA misses are going to lead to frustrated and angry customers. That's going to cause loss of credibility and revenue for the organization. Real-time SLA dashboards are built into most ITSM tools and can help alleviate those kinds of problems, right? Management guru Peter Drucker, and he's often credited with the quote, "That which gets measured gets managed," right? Now, it turns out that Drucker never actually said this, and there's actually some evidence to suggest it's inaccurate. Let's focus on the spirit of the quote rather than the historical context. An ITSM system is going to provide a wealth of metrics to an organization that can help drive the strategic decision-making process, right? For example, personnel, they can monitor periods of peak business activity. You can manage technician workload by measuring things like incoming requests, ticket turnaround time, technician performance. ROI on software purchases can be measured by correlating user activity to service requests. I mean, ultimately, it's all the extra capabilities that are included in quote unquote real ITSM systems that make them worthwhile to deploy. All right, and then last on the list here, I have ITSMs are going to help you drive up IT team efficiency. Now, realistically, ITSM should be the core of an organization's information system. The reason I say this is because all the other components you use will be an outgrowth of it. Your CMDB is the collection of stuff in your infrastructure. Your monitoring system is concerned with the health and status of all that stuff, right? And any other tools you have deployed are going to be responsible for their particular domain. However, it's the ITSM that acts as a central console for all personnel to understand what's happening with your IT function from a service standpoint, right? And it's those services, that's the reason IT exists, to provide services to the business, right? And it's obviously going to be more efficient to look in one place than to hunt and peck through multiple tools to figure out what's going on. All right, so if the good approach to getting all your tools to play nice is simply to make sure you deploy the proper application to the task at hand, what's the next step? What's better? Well, we have to actually consider how and where to integrate everything. So based on what we talked about so far, we know there's tremendous overlap between the application types I've talked about, right? First you've got your configuration management database application, right? Next, there's going to be your ITSM systems, right? And then finally, you're going to have your monitoring / NMS systems like Netreo. So the sweet spot right there in the center of this Venn diagram, that reflects what I would call IT nirvana, right? Each of these applications is responsible for processing parts of an information system for which it was specifically designed. So this step is the second in our good, better, best progression that I referenced just a minute ago. Let's dig into what makes the confluence of these three circles worthy of being such a desired state for an IT architecture, right? So going back again to the off-lease server example, we know that all three of these applications are going to share a common data set. Now, that doesn't mean they share the same database, and this is an important distinction. However, certain elements are going to be duplicated. For example, name of the device, its IP address, and maybe its location would be found in all three systems, right? And all three systems do something with that data. So the whole point of integration is that one system is either chosen as a single source of truth, and any changes to that data are propagated from that system out, or there's bidirectional and synchronous communication between all of the systems so that any of the tool consoles could be used and all personnel know that data is consistent among all of your applications. Now, when you have all of your systems integrated, you can achieve something I'll call an effort multiplier. And while that might sound like a really fancy term that might get thrown around in business schools, right? It's nothing more complex than the idea that longtime sysadmins have existed on for decades, right? Writing a script to automate an otherwise mundane and repetitive task. Now, in our example scenario, when a server goes off lease and needs to be returned to the vendor, you have the system that acts as your single source of truth to execute specified actions on all that data, on the record in question, right? So you've now automated all the work that otherwise would have required you log into 3 separate consoles to look after, right? Seems much quicker and efficient, doesn't it? Right? And then, last on the list, getting back to the idea of quality, right? Integration is going to act as the quality driver. Now, one of the magical things about integration is that when you effectively outsource work to machines, right, you eliminate human error from the equation when it comes to maintaining an IT infrastructure, right? This idea is one of the underlying themes of the whole DevOps movement. Now, of course, there's no such thing as completely removing mistakes from day-to-day IT work. I mean, after all, even Google and Microsoft have outages from time to time. But when it's humans responsible for keeping systems up to date rather than processing power, shell scripts, and network communication, you've got a higher likelihood of errors and mistakes. Okay, so in terms of tying together monitoring systems, CMDB and ITSM, let's take a look at what some of those integration points might be. Now, perhaps a good way to contextualize this diagram is to think of it from the really old school Unix philosophy, right? Of make each program do one thing well. Expect the output of every program to become the input to another as yet unknown program. So think of that as an overarching theme here as you look at this, right? Now, we can see on the left-hand side of this diagram, the potential outputs of the CMDB application become the inputs of the monitoring system. However, we can also see the possible outputs of the Netreo monitoring system are fed back into the CMDB. Now, given the current state of technology, the way these integrations are typically going to be done is through RESTful API connectivity. Going into the details of RESTful API, of what RESTful API is and how it works is outside of the scope of this session, right? But it's basically a standardized way for systems to pass data back and forth. Most applications today do have this capability, and Netreo is no exception. A specific example for this integration point might be a scenario where the CMDB has all the particulars for a given device that need to be monitored, right? And that could be anything. That could be serial number, it could be contact, it could be number of hard drives, I mean, anything, right? CMDB, the CMDB would then make a RESTful call to your monitoring system. It would make a call to Netreo and pass that data along. It would then be stored inside of Netreo. And similarly, right, a CMDB, if capable, could extract that information from Netreo to populate its own database. Now, the second common integration point that most IT organizations are going to want to pursue when aiming for IT nirvana, right, is connectivity between Netreo and an upstream ITSM system. In this case, there's typically a little more flexibility because unlike the inventory side of integration, right, NMS systems and ITSM systems are meant to transmit outbound data in the form of alerts, right? So again, one of the possible outbound avenues would be a RESTful API webhook to call a receiving ITSM system. The overall idea is that when an incident in Netreo is opened, that incident is then transmitted to a mission-specific ITSM application. Netreo would send in its payload everything you would want to see in an incident record. Similarly, right, when that same incident is closed from Netreo's perspective, another RESTful webhook call is made to the ITSM, letting it know it can close the incident because the problem that generated it has been remedied, right? Now, another avenue here that can be taken in regard to ITSM integration is through good old SMTP, right? Just a good old, old school SMTP gateway, right? And rather than use a RESTful API call, Netreo can be configured just to send emails to your ITSM system, just as if it were a regular person with an email account in your network. Those emails can be customized in exactly the same way a RESTful call can, right? And there's also some level of bidirectional communication insofar as Netreo can also be configured to listen for inbound SMTP connections. So outside systems have the ability to acknowledge incidents as well.
Hey, Andy, we can jump in here. It looks like we've got our first question. So somebody asks, are webhooks better than SMTP, vice versa? I'm looking for the easiest possible solution to get up and running quickly.
Interesting. Okay, so I think, good question. I think the answer here is it kind of depends on your situation and the technologies you currently use or are planning to use, right? At this point, webhooks and JSON payloads are an industry standard that everybody basically conforms to. That means there's support, at least for the communication piece between the two systems. Now, where things potentially get tricky is after that API endpoint. Still, so far these days, every vendor kind of does their own thing with the data, so your mileage may vary. Now, on the other hand, right, you've got SMTP and the RFC 822 standard, which has been, it's been around since before I started grade school. So it's, I'm dating myself, it's been around for decades. Personally, I like email transmission better because you have built-in queuing and retries for failures. And it's also easier for non-technical people to understand in terms of setup. However, the downside is that you don't have anywhere near as much flexibility in what you can do with your ITSM interactions, since SMTP is asynchronous by nature. You'd have to open up a completely net new email for responses, right? So it's a somewhat rigid standard. It's a little bit, it's more rigid to work with, let's put it this way. I still like it better, but it is definitely more rigid. Now, an important item to note when looking at this diagram is that while it's fairly easy to get this kind of integration set up, it's not a situation where it's just going to magically work. Now, this statement might sound a little bit ominous, so let's unpack that a little. Let's unpack that a little bit. I mean, what am I saying? It's ominous, makes it sound like, the sky is going to fall. It's not quite that bad, right? But when integrating with an ITSM system, the first thing you want to do, even before sending a single alert, is come up with a plan. Now, that plan is something I've always referred to as an alerting policy, and it's a topic I've written on extensively over the years, right? And when it comes to sending alerts to an ITSM, the plan needs to be even more detailed. You want to answer questions like, what kind of information needs to be in my payload? What types of alarms do I care about in my ITSM? What, if any, are the security ramifications of tying these systems together, right? And the same types of questions would be asked when setting up CMDB integration. Security should always be a primary concern. What kind of attributes live in my CMDB that I need to make sure are tracked in my monitoring system? Taking the extra effort to plan out your integration strategy will pay massive dividends in the long run when it comes to keeping your systems in a healthy and easily maintainable state.
Hey, Andy, we have another question here. So Jack in our audience is asking, does Netreo have the capability to handle integration based on external conditions? For example, let's say a server has been offline for 3 weeks. Can I have the response to that extended outage be an integration to another system?
Okay. All right, so there's a lot there, so let's break this down piece by piece. In terms of integration, you're going to be able to do anything the receiving system will support via RESTful API webhook, right? So if your ITSM system will support script execution via webhook, and I'm pretty sure most of them do, you're golden. You just have to know the parameters to send in your payload and you'll be up and running. However, based on the first part of that question, I think the rub here is integration based on external conditions, right? That's probably outside of the scope of the session. As it sounds to me, that's more like integration with an orchestration system, a la Puppet or Ansible or Salt. But the same concepts, I don't know those systems intimately, but the same concepts probably apply, where you're just making webhook API interactions between the two systems and telling one system to execute scripts on another. All right, so we've covered good and better by making sure that we've got applications deployed that are specifically designed for CMDB and ITSM, and we've also defined what those integration points should be. What's the next step up from better? Well, best, of course, right? Where possible, you want to shoot for what's called seamless integration with your chosen CMDB and ITSM applications. Now, seamless integration involves running a specifically designed application in a cooperating environment that can then natively talk to adjoining platforms. Now, unfortunately, this step in that progression carries with it good news and bad news. Let's cover the bad news first, because I'm the kind of person that likes to go out on a high note. So, in order to achieve so-called seamless integration, right, the first requirement is that both vendors are going to have to cooperate with one another. Now, this cooperation can take many forms. For example, in the case of ServiceNow, they support something called their Technology Partner Program. In this program, ServiceNow makes available training materials, help and guidance on building applications for their ecosystem, early release previews, and all sorts of other good stuff, those who subscribe. However, they don't rate the applications for their customers, who in this case would be Netreo, which means that a given vendor would have to support that integration as well. So that's the first downside. The second, another possible disadvantage is there could be additional costs associated with add-ons that allow this kind of integration. In the case of Netreo and our ServiceNow add-on, which I'll get into in a second, there is no additional cost, but just know that's one of the disadvantages that could be there, right? And the last disadvantage is that having an application designed for a vendor's ecosystem could introduce change control challenges, right? Unlike our RESTful API integrations that we just talked about, which are open standards, specific vendor ecosystems are subject not only to one platform's version change, right, but the second vendor platform as well. So, using ServiceNow again as an example, the newly released Netreo ServiceNow application is approved right now only for use with Orlando, their Orlando release. But in their upcoming Paris release next month, it's right, as a Netreo's responsibility to resubmit the application for approval, so we know so they can certify that it's going to work under Paris. So you've got two systems now that you have to deal with in terms of versions and things like that. Now, none of these hurdles are insurmountable, but they definitely present minor obstacles that don't exist if open standards are going to be used to achieve integration. However, right, the advantages of opting for seamless integration have the potential to overshadow those challenges, right? To start with, the configuration is probably going to be easier, right? It's going to be a matter of following step-by-step instructions for setup, right? You're not going to have to mess with API endpoints or setting up email gateways, right? Generally speaking, things are just going to work. That doesn't mean you don't want to plan, like I talked about a second ago, but generally speaking, things are just going to work, right? Now, the next benefit is going to be ease of maintenance. Again, instead of having to worry about configuring individual elements, seamless integration will most likely involve a simple installation of an updated application from an approved repository, right? This process is how vendors like Atlassian and Cherwell and ServiceNow and many others handle add-ons within their respective ecosystems, right? And then the last advantage to mention is ease of use, particularly for personnel who are only versed in one of the applications in your environment, right? Since the add-on is integrated into the look and feel of the primary application, right? There's no extra learning curve to climb. In the case of the Netreo ITSM Incident Integrator, and I'll discuss that in a second, there's no need for any users to even log into Netreo if that's not their primary tool. They can get all the information they need through the embedded add-on and be immediately productive. Right, so I mentioned, at the beginning of the session, one of our purposes here was to promote our new ServiceNow specific ITSM application, which was very recently approved for listing in the ServiceNow store. This is our first collaboration with ServiceNow, and it's our intent to continue releasing improvements to this application, and then to release new applications as well to help our customers who also take advantage of the ServiceNow platform. Now, the overall idea of the Netreo ITSM Incident Integrator is to allow a collector that lives in the ServiceNow platform to send incident updates back to Netreo and inform Netreo users if there are inconsistencies between the two systems. The primary use case here is that when NOC or other personnel resolve incidents in Netreo, regardless of their, when they resolve incidents in ServiceNow, regardless of their state in Netreo, inconsistencies can pop up, and those inconsistencies they have adverse consequences, right? Perhaps skewing incident metrics that you might be using for reporting, or introduction of inefficiencies for engineering personnel who won't know if incidents are valid, which incident is valid, the one that shows up in Netreo or the one that shows up in ServiceNow. So the idea is, let's make things more efficient. Let's make sure those incident lists are synchronized. Right, so as you can see in these screen images here, once you add the Netreo app to your ServiceNow instance and then provided a PIN and an API key, you're ready to roll, right? On your active incidents report, you can see if a given incident is consistent or inconsistent with what's reported in ServiceNow, right? And then here in an incident detail page on the rightmost screenshot, right? You get similar information in addition to links that point back to ServiceNow, so you can easily open up the incident in that platform in a different tab and then compare the two. Now, getting back to this main slide about Netreo's partnership with ServiceNow, as I mentioned a moment ago, this is our first app on their store, and it was recently released, middle of last month. Now, prior to this application release, we already had the ability to open up webhook-based incidents in ServiceNow and get responses back to allow incident linkage even without the new app. On the CMDB side of the equation, presently within Netreo, we do have the ability to plug in ServiceNow CMDB information, provide credentials, and then pull down all of that inventory data, and then load up in Netreo what you currently see. So phase one of our project, phase one of our ServiceNow collaboration was to do with ITSM, but for a phase 2 project, our intent is to build capabilities to allow CMDB reconciliation, right, between Netreo and ServiceNow, using actually some capabilities that were just released with last night's Netreo update, right, in terms of device attributes and things like that. So that's where we're going next as far as our collaboration with ServiceNow. All right, so let me actually take a brief second here. I'm going to drink some coffee and pause the virtual floor and open up for some questions.
Well, don't take too big of a gulp, Andy. So we have another question here. So does Netreo support sending its incident information to the ServiceNow EM event endpoint rather than directly to the incidents API?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, it's been coming up a lot. We found that customers are not using necessarily the incident API, right? But they're sending everything to just a general events API within ServiceNow, and then you rely upon ServiceNow to do all the slicing and dicing of the stuff that comes in, right? That's how you can deal with inbound logs and things like that. So yeah, it does. In fact, the way the configuration works right now is that your endpoint is completely variable. So as long as your alert action is set up with a valid payload and authentication details, you can send incident data wherever you need to. We've got, it's probably I want to say a 40-60 split between this and then going to the incident API still for our customers as far as who's using this capability. All right. So, you know, one of the things I'd like to do when I get the opportunity to host these webinars is give a little bit of a sneak peek as to what's coming down the road from a development, software development perspective, feature perspective, right? You know, so first up on the list, and I briefly mentioned this a second ago, is a new ServiceNow application to handle CMDB reconciliation between that platform and Netreo. It's potentially it's a huge pain point for our customers now, right? Because you've got different constituencies using each tool. So the ability to sync those things up, figure out who the authoritative source is, and make those synchronizations is huge. So instead of one-way discovery, the plan's to introduce bi-directional updates. Now, the next thing, at least on my radar, right, as part of Netreo's acquisition of CloudMonic several months ago, one rather interesting bit of technology we gained as it relates to this topic, the topic of tying ITSM and monitoring systems together, are canned alert integrations to most of the bigger ITSM vendors on the scene today. So a project we currently have in the works is porting that capability into our Netreo Professional and Ultimate editions, right? That stuff already exists in Netreo Essentials, but we want to get that ease of use built into the higher tier Netreo products. Now, when the product team and I started going down the road to seamless integration, ServiceNow was a no-brainer for us for our first add-on. They're the 800-pound gorilla in the space, CMDB, ITSM, and they're in use by a number of our customers. However, our intent is to start looking at the ecosystems of other vendors as well. Sharewell has generated a lot of interest among our customer base, and we're also weighing Atlassian seamless integration too, into Jira and that platform. Right, and then of course there are always other things we could add when it comes to the integration of Netreo with CMDB, ITSM, and other tools in your environment. And quite honestly, a good chunk of what I do day to day when I'm figuring out roadmap and things like that for Netreo is we rely on customer feedback for enhancements, like this. So if anybody listening in does have suggestions, on a direction we should go in terms of integration, what are we doing good, what are we doing bad? Then myself and the other folks in the team are always more than willing to listen. So please let us know. Okay, so that's actually all the material I had planned for today's session. So let me take another opportunity here to pause for questions.
So Andy, I'm taking a look, and it looks like in your other vendors section, you actually covered it. The question was, who else do you have plans to integrate with?
Yeah. So the first one's definitely going to be Sharewell. I've started investigating getting something, I believe it's called an MPAC in the Sharewell environment. And it's the same type of idea. You have a collector that lives on that platform and can talk back and forth with Netreo. But something to keep in mind, because we do support the open webhook standards and things like Sharewell do, you can still achieve that interaction now, but it's just at that better level rather than the best level. But Sharewell is definitely highest on our list from those other vendors.
All All right, that's it. I think while we wait for more questions to come in, you can carry on, Andy.
Awesome. Okay. So another thing that we like to do is another thing we like to do during these webinars is take advantage of the captive audience and kind of bring you up to date on all the news and notes about Netreo. So the first announcement, we're pretty proud of this. Netreo Essentials was just recently named as one of the best application performance monitoring software platforms by digital.com. We encourage you to head over to our site and check out the press release and give the Netreo Essentials platform a try for yourself. Right? If you like what you see, we're currently offering 50% off Netreo Essentials if you use the code Essentials50 when you sign up. The next announcement, right, is our ASAP program. Now, by now, many of you have heard about the recent SolarWinds compromise, and some of you may still be dealing with the fallout. So with our accelerated SolarWinds alternative program, we'll replace SolarWinds with Netreo for less than you're currently paying for your annual maintenance or subscription, and we'll get you back to monitoring your infrastructure in 5 days, and we'll provide free implementation and training. And we're also offering similar competitive swap out programs, if you're considering replacing a different vendor. Right, and then last but not least, join us on Reddit. We're out there. We recently launched the Netreo Reddit channel, where you can find conversations on the Netreo platform, or if you just want to talk to me about music from the 80s. But you can find all that in the Netreo Reddit channel, and you can access our latest content there as well. Just really quickly here for the folks who are listening in that aren't currently customers, but we wanted to give you a quick insight into who Netreo is. We're a comprehensive IT monitoring and management solution. Netreo, we've got a 20-year track record of success with global brands, and they've trusted us to help them get visibility into all of their IT resources, whether that's hybrid or cloud. Well, cloud didn't exist 20 years ago. On-prem stuff, networking gear, servers, you name it. Over that time span, we've achieved a 98% customer retention rate. And we recently just became the highest rated vendor on Gartner Peer Insights with a minimum of 10 reviews and 100% willingness to recommend from our customers. All right, so before I wrap up, let me take one more opportunity here to answer questions that you might have. See if any other rolled in.
And Andy, while we wait for those questions to roll in, I'm going to pop up a poll here. So let us know how we can help you further. If you'd like a technical demo of Netreo pricing, if you want to know more about those swap or ASAP programs, and then of course, if you're a customer and you want to know more about the ServiceNow app, we'll have your account manager reach out to you. So let me take a look here. Just leave this open for another minute. Not seeing a whole lot of other questions flow through. Looks like some people had some audio issues, but we got those taken care of. All righty. So I think we still got a few more people filling out the poll. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out here today. All right, so awesome. So Andy, I haven't seen any other questions come through.
Okay.
So I think with that, we will probably go ahead and wrap things up. Okay,
so I just want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to participate and listen to me drone on about how cool Netreo is. And this particular topic, again, thanks. I'm sure you folks are all very busy, and it means a lot that you'll take time out of your day to sit and talk to me. So Kyle, I'll go ahead and hand the reins back to you.
All right, thank you, Andy. So, okay, folks, that's going to wrap up our webinar. So thank you so much again for joining us today. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us on our website, info@netreo.com, request a demo, all of that. So with that, we'll call it a wrap and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.